I was fortunate to be born in Vandalia, Illinois, shortly after midnight on April 5th, 1949. My dad and mom intended to use St. Anthony Hospital in Effingham, Illinois for my debut, but the evening before, I was showing that I wished to arrive a wee bit early. Dad made a snap decision to take us to Mark Greer Hospital in Vandalia. I arrived shortly after midnight in a routine birth. So, what's so fortunate about that? Well, as I was being born in Vandalia, a raging fire started at St. Anthony Hospital in Effingham. 74 people died there, including all the mothers and newborns in the maternity ward. It was a national news story featured in the next issue of Life magazine. My high school basketball star dad eloped with the beautiful Joyce Bennett on July 18, 1941. After becoming a skilled pipe welder in a school in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. His welding skills landed him in the 784th Engineer Petroleum Distribution Company. The unit deployed to North Africa, and Dad was quickly promoted to technical sergeant. On August 11, 1944, as his company was inspecting equipment and preparing for the invasion of southern France, Dad's right arm was mangled in the gearbox of a large earth auger. He refused amputation and made it to the Percy Jones Hospital in Battle Creek, Michigan. He was in the care of a Dr. Hansen, a renowned and creative orthopedic surgeon. Dad successfully fought through 27 surgeries over 3.5 years to retain partial use of his arm and hand. Dad's parents, Grandma Effie and Granddad Harold, always known by his nickname Happy, lived on a farm in this big house. We lived in a little one behind it. I had 2 grandparents, 2 parents, and a great bird dog named Rex watching over me. All 5 of them taught me as much as my young mind could absorb. Granddad and I were inseparable. Dad confirmed decades later that Granddad's goal on the farm was to teach me every practical thing that he possibly could. I didn't realize at age 4 that he was teaching me to read and understand numbers in the machine shed where we maintained equipment. Supposedly at age 4, I could bring him the right size box wrench that he asked for. By 1955, Dad tested for and won the postmaster job in Jonestown, Illinois. He bought a lot on South Street and moved our little farmhouse to it on a special flatbed truck. Many additions were added, and it was finished in August 1956. Thanks to Granddad Happy's machine shed education, grade school and middle school were boring. I spent rainy days thumbing through our World Book Encyclopedia. It started me dreaming of living on a global scale as an adult. High school was nearly as easy except for chemistry and physics as taught by Mr. Ross Myers. His first words to the 5 of us who took chemistry were, "You might be the smart ones in this school, but you're not the least bit prepared for college. I'm gonna fix that." Well, thank you, Mr. Myers, for doing so. I graduated high school in May 1967 as Cold Valley Victorian with my friend Charlie Yother. Aside from playing tenor saxophone in the Brownstown School Band for 4 years, my main interest growing up in Brownstown was sports. I played baseball and basketball in middle school and high school. I really thought it was cool when I wore my Letterman jacket in middle school and high school. Quail hunting with Dad is one of my fondest memories. Water skiing on the Lake of the Ozarks is a close second. My cousin like a brother, Dick Taylor, and I made crude skateboards and learned to ride them. Thanks to his dad, golf became a lifelong obsession. There simply wasn't time for girls. After high school graduation, I was hired by Holiday Inn to be one of the warehousemen organizing and moving all of the things that would be moved into the new motel being built. After the move-in, I successfully worked as a steward, a wine sommelier, and an underage assistant bartender on weekends. After I started at Greenville College, the combination of all that led to hearty partying and a juggling of 2 girlfriends, one in Vandalia and the other in Greenville. That put a little dent in my grades, but my cramming and test-taking talents carried me through. A Fortran computer class awakened me to the power of computer automation. After my 3rd year, I left Greenville and began attending the Illinois College of Optometry, or ICO, in Chicago. There was only 1 girl in our class. Our weekend nights were spent partying on Rush Street. Occasionally, we'd have mixers with the co-eds attending Mundelein College for women. Telephone numbers to the floors of Mundelein's dormitory were exchanged. At the start of our 2nd semester, 5 of us moved out of the ICO dorm and into a townhouse on Winthrop Avenue, 3 blocks south of Mundelein. Just before the 2nd weekend in February, we called all the floors of the Mundelein dorm and invited anybody who wanted to come over to our townhouse that Saturday night. An exotic beauty attended. When I noticed her, it was, as the Italians say, the thunderbolt. Shaken, but with as much confidence as I could muster, I went to where she was sitting and smiled. I said, "Hi, you're cute. What's your name?" Well, that wasn't the greatest of opening lines. This vision smiled at me and simply said, "Selena." 2 long-distance relationships in Southern Illinois were instantly irrelevant. After a fun-filled year of drawing closer, Selena and I were married on July 29, 1972. Except for Selena's brother Joe, both of our families predicted the marriage wouldn't last because it was too early in our lives. Yet, here she is, 53 years later, directing and shooting this video. We squeaked by financially in our humble apartment, but felt some financial pressure. Fortunately, I won an Armed Forces Health Professions Scholarship for the fall of 1973. The next 2 years at Illinois College of Optometry were a financial breeze. We could even afford a 1969 Chevelle 396 Super Sport that passed everything on the road except a gas station. Selena and I graduated over the same weekend in May of 1974. On July 6, 1974, I was sworn in as a Biomedical Science Corps officer at Shepherd Air Force Base, Texas, and completed the world's easiest basic training 2 weeks later. We stopped at Brownstown on our way to my first assignment. Of course, Mom had to take pictures of her military boy in uniform. I reported into the clinic at Charleston Air Force Base in mid-July 1974. We were surprised to receive a 3-bedroom house soon after checking in. I planned to return to Southern Illinois after my 2-year scholarship payback, but in February of 1976, my Air Force optometry chief, Don Dunton, called me and offered an assignment to Howard Air Force Base in Panama. I told my dear pregnant Selena about the idea, and without any hesitation, she said, "Let's go." We arrived at Howard Air Force in mid-July 1976. On our first day on base, I found a Glastron bass boat for sale and bought it. We moved into base housing at 84 Coffee Avenue a few days later. On August 11, 1976, Brent Christopher Eyestone was born at Gorgas Hospital in the Panama Canal Zone. Our live-in maid, Ia, was a godsend when Mark Allen Eyestone doubled our offspring with his birth on April 21, 1978. The optometry clinic workload at Howard, averaged 10 patients per day. Once a year, I was the optometrist on a medical team that flew on a dedicated C-130 to United States military groups and embassies in the capitals of Central and South America. The workload was very high on those trips, but we got to experience the sights and cultures of each castle. I welcomed an additional duty as medical mobility officer because I got to do small arms training qualification with my medical mobility team members. The team was staffed, trained, and equipped to deploy with Air Force combat control teams on short notice. On November 18, 1978, the People's Temple cult leader Jim Jones ordered the killing of U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan and convinced over 900 cult members to commit suicide. On November 19, 1978, I covered the medical desk at U.S. Southern Command in Quarry Heights, Panama, as my medical mobility team deployed to Jonestown, Guyana. The team performed flawlessly during the gunfight and stayed on to help with the huge mortuary affairs effort. For the first time, I felt like I was really in the military. I received orders to U.S. Air Force Hospital Castle near Merced, California. I hoped I could get more experience in medical readiness. My welcome interview with the Castle Hospital commander, Colonel Frank Berry, resulted in the additional duty of Castle Hospital Disaster Preparedness Officer. I started reading Air Force and Strategic Air Command, or SAC, regulations on response to accidental nuclear emissions. The military code name for an unintended nuclear emission is Broken Arrow. In those days, all SAC bases held a Broken Arrow exercise every month. Castle had one the week following my arrival. Dr. Berry announced the exercise and ordered personnel to configure for Broken Arrow mass casualties. I walked around the hospital to see what was being done by the staff. I didn't see anyone reviewing a response checklist or preparing for mass casualties. Everyone was either continuing their daily routine or just sitting around doing nothing. I reported my findings to Dr. Berry. He wrote an open letter to the staff encouraging everyone to get on board with disaster preparedness. I started meeting with each response team leader and assisted them with developing their disaster response checklist. I used the Air Force regulation format to rewrite the Castle Hospital Disaster Response Plan, and I included in it the detailed response checklist from each team. I began communicating and coordinating with the staff at Strategic Air Command Headquarters Medical Readiness Division, the Castle Air Force Base Disaster Preparedness Officer, and the Merced County Emergency Manager. Our hospital staff began working with their response team checklists. Within a year, Castle Hospital was receiving 0 defect findings in the monthly Broken Arrow exercises. In September 1980, we held a local joint military civilian exercise that received quite a bit of local press coverage. In 1981, we held a regional joint military civilian exercise using a military aircraft scenario. Newspapers featured moulage and student actors more than the value of response training. In 1982, our commander, Dr. Berry, was reassigned and was replaced by a gung-ho Vietnam-experienced former Army physician named William Pettit. He liked to be called Commander Wild Bill. In the spring of 1983, my Medical Service Corps friend, Captain Jack Simpson, arranged for a U.S. Army medical evacuation helicopter from Fort Ord to participate in a monthly Broken Arrow exercise. The litter bearer training on safely loading and unloading litter patients was a huge hit, and so were the joy rides given to our hospital staff after the exercise. The unit morale was through the roof. To celebrate, Commander Wild Bill arranged for a beer kegger on the hospital patio after work. Wild Bill, Jack Simpson, and I started working on the keg a little bit early. About 3 beers in, Exercise Bounding Pulse 83 was born. We made it happen by October 1983. To simulate a wartime medical mobility deployment to Europe, Jack Simpson figuratively deployed his medical mobility troops in buses to the Merced County Fairgrounds in Los Banos. They unpacked and set up a civil defense package disaster hospital, just as they would with their prepositioned hospitals stored in Europe. Training in patient care under chemical warfare conditions was also done. With the assistance of my base public affairs friend, Major Leo Vrana, I published an article about the exercise in the Armed Forces Medical Service Digest. Quite a stir was created by the point I made in the article about demonstrating that military medical resources, given adequate warning time, can and should be able to evacuate a target area prior to nuclear attack. 2 days later, after the release of my article, an action officer at Strategic Air Command headquarters called and asked me if I would take a full-time job in medical readiness if it was offered. I said yes. A few weeks later, he called back and said that the Air Force Surgeon General, a proctologist, had canceled my readiness job orders and wrote on the margin that, quote, optometrists should be looking at eyes, unquote. Wouldn't it have been fun to ask the Air Force Surgeon General what proctologists should be looking at? I received orders to Norton Air Force Base. While there, I just flipped lenses and wondered if I would ever get a medical readiness assignment. It finally came in March 1986 when I received short notice orders to the surgeon's office, Headquarters U.S. European Command, as a combat medical planner operator. I arrived at Stuttgart, Germany on Saturday, April 26, 1986. I took a cab to the Weingerhof Hotel in Weingen and checked in. I didn't know that my early arrival would once again be associated with a disaster. As I was putting my desk in order on Monday morning, April 28th, the senior medical staff officer, Colonel Ed Taylor, came and told me to go with a Navy lieutenant commander to the medical desk in the EUCOM Command Center. He said, I think you have some background on a problem that has come to EUCOM's attention. I was soon escorted through the front door of a building that still had a Nazi propaganda painting from World War II over it. The top center of 6 screens in the command center amphitheater of desks caused my jaw to drop. It looked like a nuclear plant building had exploded. Army Major General Aguano walked in, and everybody stood up. The gist of the briefing was that there had been an explosion and fire of Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear plant west of Kiev, Ukraine. 2 days prior, intelligence estimated at least 10 responders had died, but the Soviet government was denying the existence of the incident. There were 2 officers' wives' clubs in Kiev the day of the explosion, one from Ramstein Air Force Base and the other from Patch Barracks. Both went on trains to St. Petersburg the day after the explosion. General Aguano talked about some courses of action, but it was clear that he had no experience with nuclear accidents. He dismissed us. I went to him and asked him if any plume models were available. He looked at me like a deer in headlights and asked me what a plume model is and why I'd asked. I explained both and added that we were going to have to be careful about release of information to the public so that we don't create panic, often the biggest problem during nuclear accident response. Yes, I should have told him about my background in Strategic Air Command. He dismissed me as if I was just a major and somehow insulting him. Fortunately, the next morning, 2 full colonels from U.S. Army Europe headquarters in Heidelberg had the same conversation with Major General Aguano. The general sent for me as soon as they left. As I approached him, he said, "You know what you're talking about. Now, tell me what we need to do, and be my eyes and ears on the UCOM Crisis Action Team." He handed me the initial plume model that the two Army colonels gave him. It was clear that the wives' clubs may have been exposed to radiation. We didn't know if the Soviet trains protected them or sucked in radiation. While significant radiation was being measured in Finland, and a very slight amount was detected on some German lettuce, the Soviet Union continued to deny that any nuclear accident had happened. I informed my boss, Colonel Taylor, who informed the acting UCOM surgeon, Major General Ledford, that we needed to be ready to medically screen the wives' clubs as soon as they returned. I worked closely with the UCOM political advisor, acronym POLAD. Neither the State Department nor intelligence resources were able to obtain any information about the wives' clubs in St. Petersburg. I wrote press releases that were edited by the POLAD and released to the Stars and Stripes military newspaper, the Associated Press, and United Press International. That routine went on for 6 weeks until Lufthansa Airlines was able to work a deal with the Soviets to bring the American ladies back to Germany. The amiable General Ledford did a great job greeting the ladies at the airport, keeping them calm, and escorting them to a radiation exposure screening in the replacement depot building at Rhein-Main Air Force Base. Only one tennis shoe emitted a single click on a Geiger counter. All the ladies' thyroid scans were negative. The Soviet trains had protected them from fallout. 2 weeks before the Wives Club ladies returned from the Soviet Union, Major General Monty B. Miller arrived to fill the role as Headquarters U.S. European Command Surgeon. We seemed to hit it off as I prepared him to deal with the Chernobyl disaster situation. After Chernobyl, Navy Lieutenant Commander Mike Meyer, an outstanding medical planner operator, taught me how to use the clunky workstation for the Worldwide Military Command and Control System, acronym WMIX. I became proficient at using the Medical Planning Module, or MPM, in WMIX to calculate the medical resource requirements, then use the requirements to build the Time Phase Force Deployment Data, or TIPFID, for the European Command's OPLAN 4102, Defense of Western Europe. It was a lot of mental work, but I actually enjoyed working at the top secret level with the UCOM staff and its component commands to update the medical portion of OPLAN 4102. On May 17, 1987, shortly before midnight, an Iraqi Mirage F-1 fighter fired 2 Exocet missiles into the port side of the USS Stark frigate, patrolling international waters 2 miles outside the exclusion zone off the Iraqi coast. The missiles hit the Stark and initially killed 37 American sailors. 21 more were wounded and burned, thus in need of immediate aeromedical evacuation. Listing heavily to port, the USS Stark made it to Manama, Bahrain. I was called into the UCOM Crisis Action Team on May 18th, about 4 a.m. About noon, Jack Simpson, my friend from Castle Air Force Base, who was now the commander of the U.S. Military Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron in Europe, called me. He told me that whether he sent C-9s or C-141s to Bahrain, the birds would have to refuel at the U.S. Air Base at Incirlik, Turkey. But the Turks had suddenly decided not to allow any U.S. military aircraft to fly in their airspace. Once again, I worked through the UCOM POLAD to the State Department. The Turks kept vacillating between go and no-go. We all stayed awake for 3 straight days, wrangling with the Turks, until they relented. The delay cost American servicemen's limbs and lives. The incident reminded me of my dad's stories about his interactions with the locals in North Africa during World War II. In early 1988, I submitted several issues concerning the medical planning module to my counterpart on the Joint Staff, Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Roger Daft. Soon after, Major General Miller was promoted to Lieutenant General and became the Surgeon General of the Air Force. He was replaced at UCOM by Air Force Major General Alexander Rusty Sloan. I was the duty officer on August 28, 1988, when two Italian jets collided at the Ramstein Air Base air show. 3 pilots and 67 spectators were killed, and over 350 spectators were seriously injured, generally with burns. After-action reports about the local German and U.S. military response were scathing. No military-civilian exercises had ever been held. I was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel on February 1, 1989. Shortly after, I received 2 secure telephone calls. Both started with the statement, "This call never happened, but..." My first was from my Joint Staff Medical Plans and Operations Division counterpart, Roger Daft. He informed me that I was going to replace him when he retired in July. The second call was from Colonel Davis, my Biomedical Sciences Corps Chief. He advised me that Air Force Surgeon General Miller had planned my next 3 assignments. They were to be the Joint Staff, National War College, and Commander of the School of Healthcare Sciences. Each of those would check a box so that I could compete for the rank of Brigadier General. I was stunned. I never considered that General Miller thought of me as a water walker. By 1988, the Warsaw Pact was starting to show some cracks. NATO decided that the 1989 Wintex-Simex exercise scenario should be about NATO's response to Soviet actions should the Warsaw Pact countries go rogue. I spent a lot of time traveling and working with NATO allies, developing the medical play for Wintex-Simex 89 at Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, or SHAPE, in Mons, Belgium. The Tiananmen Square uprising in Beijing happened in June 1989, just before I left for my Joint Staff assignment. I wondered what effect the potential ending of the Cold War might have during my time on the Joint Staff. When I got to my J4 Medical Plans and Operations Division desk, I found that my Class Act predecessor, Roger Daft, left one thing. It was a box of business cards he had printed for me. Looking at the card, it hit me that I had gone from a lens flipper at base level to the Joint Staff in the Pentagon in 3 years. There was also a note on the desk stating that Air Force Surgeon General Monty Miller hoped I would be able to develop a joint medical planners course and fix the WMIX medical planning module. General Colin Powell became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on 1 October 1989. The Berlin Wall fell on November 9, 1989. The Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc began to crumble. The world order had just changed. Without huge armies fighting their long-term attrition wars, the WMIX Medical Planning Module, or MPM, was obsolete. My mandate to fix the MPM had just changed to replace the MPM with automated tools that could define medical requirements in more detail in smaller conflicts and operations. On December 15, 1989, the Panamanian General Assembly declared war on the United States. Yeah, really. On the 16th, 4 active duty U.S. officers on their way to dinner at the Panama City Marriott were shot by Panama Defense Force, or PDF, soldiers at a roadblock. One was killed and another wounded. A U.S. Navy officer who witnessed the incident was taken into PDF custody and beaten badly. His wife was also taken and threatened sexually. The United States response was Operation Just Cause. 4 days later, starting at 11 p.m., I sat at the medical desk in the Logistics Research Center in the National Military Command Center, acronym NMCC. We received the Just Cause briefing, and its operations began at midnight. The briefing repeated an order by Secretary of Defense Cheney that, quote, no one would be deployed to the area of operations without his signature on a deployment order. Also, supposedly, Secretary Cheney has left the building. After the operation, we learned that Secretary Cheney was actually with General Powell in the Pentagon the entire night of December 19th and 20th. During the night, I learned that U.S. Navy SEALs were going to assault Paitilla Airport from the bay. I had flown from Paitilla out to Contadora Island Resort 3 times. It seemed to me that the SEAL team would be too exposed and take several losses. Shortly after that thought, the Armed Services Blood Program Manager, Army Colonel Tony Pope, called me. Just like Grenada, planners had put blood pallets on the tip fid, but no blood program personnel to repack it and distribute the blood to where it was needed. Based upon what we were told, there wasn't any time to obtain a SecDef deployment order. Knowing that it could cost our careers and retirement pay, Tony and I decided we had to countermand a Secretary of Defense order during combat operations. We managed to get Army Major Mike Stanton on a C-5 leaving Dover Air Force Base, and he arrived at Howard Air Force Base 15 minutes before the pallets of blood. Many combatants' lives and limbs were saved. I had the rest of the night to think about my defense if someone questioned my action. At 6 a.m., the Navy Commodore on the mobilization side of J4 Medical Division came in and read my log. He became very angry and asked, "Who gave you the authority to countermand a SecDef order?" My prepared answer was, "Moral imperative, sir. Shall we play this one out on 60 Minutes? He sat back in his chair, shook his head, and said, "Good answer," and walked away. I never heard another word about the matter until Colonel Pope told the story at his retirement ceremony 2 years later. In 1991, I wrote a Joint Staff white paper that described why the MPM couldn't be a reliable requirements calculator for the small-scale conflicts anticipated after the Cold War. Its casualty rates reference data were only reasonable for large-scale theater-sized combat. Near the same time, I was the Joint Staff guy at a medical planners conference to consider the New World Order. I was asked what a tool to replace the MPM might look like. With a grease pencil and acetate on an old overhead projector, I drew something like this graphic. The medical network flow model was to be a link and node simulation model that would process the patient stream in detail across medical evacuation links through healthcare facility nodes like this graphic. I even mentioned that the node should be on a digital map background. The rates white paper and that grease pencil drawing helped me obtain some funding for a working prototype simulation model that the contractor called External Logistics Processor Medical, or LPX-Med for short. The U.S. military, joint medical community, and I owe much gratitude to my boss for most of the time on the Joint Staff. Army Colonel Patrick Hugh wasn't a medical planner operator, but he understood the importance of my 2 most important objectives: creating a joint medical planner operators course and replacing the medical planning module. He restructured my workload so that I could focus on them. After 2 years of collaborative work, I was thrilled to give the first medical planning course, or JMPC, lecture. It was in the Bethesda Hospital Training Facility, commonly called the Little Red Schoolhouse. I took this photo before that first lecture. It shows the 2 Army colonels and 2 Navy captains who were the keys to making the JMPC a reality. At right is commander of the Little Red Schoolhouse, then Army Colonel Mary Fry, who did all the bureaucratic paperwork, Navy Captain Bill Dial, who developed curriculum content with me, and at far left, Colonel Patrick Hugh. The first class had 23 students and included a seminar on logistics led by the Joint Staff J4 Logistics Director, Lieutenant General Gary Mears. 30 years later, the JMPC has become the Basic and Advanced Joint Medical Operations course offered at the Defense Medical Readiness Institute on Fort Sam Houston, Texas. It also warms this old retirer's heart to see that there is also a Joint Medical Planning Tool course at Fort Sam Houston as well. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Corey Kirshner and then Navy Captain Mike Sashin carried on my initial work, which evolved into a multifunctional medical planning set of tools. Those tools replaced the MPM. By 1993, LPX Med was ready for a test drive. At the same time, Operation Restore Hope was underway in Somalia. There was an increased threat to the U.S. presence from Somali warlords. That prompted U.S. Central Command to request a U.S. field hospital to be deployed to Mogadishu. My boss's boss, Rear Admiral Smith, came to me and nonchalantly said, "Hey Scott, how about you fire up your prototype and compare the morbidity and mortality between care offshore on amphibious ships against a field hospital in Mogadishu." Happy to be asked to play with my new toy, I used a stream of 100 wounded in action patients over a 24-hour period and used an Army 200-bed field hospital in Mogadishu City because I knew U.S. Central Command had requested one. The amphibious ship care network generated twice the demand for Black Hawk medevac flight hours than the network to the field hospital. The delays would cause patient souring in the amphibious ship network, creating 57% more died of wounds than the field hospital network. When I showed Admiral Smith the findings, he took me to General Mears immediately and had me show him the LPX Med results. General Mears laughed and cracked that it might be the first time a computer ever agreed with humans. As they laughed, they explained that they hoped the simulation would agree with their opinions because General Powell was reticent to approve the Central Command's request. They told me there was only one deep water dock in Mogadishu, and unloading a field hospital would tie it up for a week. They wanted me to run that model without knowing anyone's biases. General Mears asked for a one-page point paper on the LPX Med findings. It was delivered to General Powell, and the U.S. Army's 46th Combat Support Hospital from Fort Devens was ready to receive patients a month later. A week after that was the Battle of Mogadishu. It's the one that inspired the movie Black Hawk Down. My counterpart at the Army Surgeon's office later told me that there was no question that the Combat Support Hospital prevented many more deaths and loss of limbs than what the amphibious ship would have done. I was never more gratified in my military career. My two top Joint Staff objectives had been met. Coincidentally, General Powell and I decided to retire from active duty at the same time for the same reasons. The October 1992 presidential election sealed the deal. Before he retired, General Powell took a grip and grin photo with every individual who had worked with him on the Joint Staff. He resigned in September 1993 after too many futile battles with the Clinton administration. But I was in the primary zone for the 1994 Air Force Colonel's Promotion Board, and I had to serve for another year to get a 20-year retirement. Knowing that I could not support the new Commander-in-Chief, I turned down promotion and the assignment to National War College. As my retirement date approached at the end of July 1994, my former Joint Staff office mates and Lieutenant General Mears held a retirement ceremony for me in the Joint Staff conference room. After retirement, I spent 17 years with Patel, a not-for-profit research and development organization. I worked on several information technology projects, usually as a functional analyst in healthcare and disaster management initiatives. A highlight was serving as the functional co-chair on the medical working group at the International Object Management Group, or OMG. Full retirement has been a pleasure. Selena and I are thoroughly enjoying our time in the Celebrate by Del Webb retirement community. As I look back at my life, I like what I see. I'm grateful for the foundation provided in rural America when America was at its strongest. I'm glad I had the confidence to seek a more worldly view and to live it. I was proud to serve my country and was grateful to learn disaster preparedness and combat medical support planning. I enjoyed changing careers 4 times, and I'm glad I rode the bow wave of the information revolution. Selena and I still enjoy a wonderful marriage. We have traveled to all 7 continents. But when I turn and look forward, I see American colleges and universities making a reality of Nikita Khrushchev's 1959 prediction of creeping socialism in the United States. The political views of our younger generations are increasingly socialist. I see a decreasing percentage of our population who recognize the growing existential threats to the United States. Their schooling has failed to teach them that peace comes from strength and weakness creates aggression from others. In the absence of congressional term limits in our Constitution, I see U.S. senators and congressmen focused only on their re-election rather than the well-being of the country. I see good and potentially bad in the rapid growth of artificial intelligence technologies. Across all human history, every great civilization crumbled 4 to 6 generations after its greatest generation. So, I worry what my grandchildren will face. Thank you.